Elly Griffiths, welcome to the Swedish Book Fair.
Thank you.
I begin with asking what are your impressions so far?
Well, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be here, and it's such a huge book fair. I don't think I'd realised how big it was. And when I first arrived in Sweden, I was in Uppsala for a couple of days because I was giving a talk there. And of course, that's a beautiful little university town, and everyone's cycling. And then I arrived in Göteborg, and this huge hotel and this, wonderful towers everywhere, and this amazing book fair, which is just fantastic and so full of life. People seem to be so excited to be here.
I've gotten the impression that you have some kind of a special relation to Sweden, and Uppsala University is a part of the book, isn't it?
Yes, it's really wonderful actually. I think Sweden was the first country to buy the foreign rights to my book, so I've always been really really grateful for that, and really felt I had a sort of special link. And Sweden and Denmark as well have been the two most enthusiastic countries, really. And so yes, so in the Nighthawks, which I did learn how to say in Swedish, but I've now forgotten.
Nattfalkarna.
Nattfalkarna. In the Nighthawks, Ruth acquires a new colleague who's called David Brown, and he worked at Uppsala University, which I chose mainly because of the reputation for archaeology, so I wanted him to go somewhere very good. But he has been married to a Swedish woman, now he's come to Norfolk, and he makes it clear that that's very much a downward step that he's come to Norfolk. So he will feature again in the new book. So it has been wonderful. There's been a real, Swedish people seem to have really liked the books and really liked Ruth, which is wonderful.
Well, what is the story behind Elly Griffiths? Because it's a pen name, isn't it?
Yes, it is a pen name. So my real name is Domenica de Rosa,
right,
which I know sounds made up. It just sounds like a made-up name, but it's Italian. My dad was Italian. It's actually got a really nice meaning. It means Sunday of the Rose. Domenica de Rosa, which is very pretty. And I always thought that I always wanted to be a writer, and I always thought that if I wrote a book it would be as Domenica de Rosa, because it's a really writery name, isn't it? So eventually I was published, and I wrote 4 books kind of about Italy, family, relationships, and they were all as Domenica de Rosa. But then I wrote a crime novel, which was The Crossing Places, and my agent said, oh, you need a crime name. And my grandmother was Elly Griffiths, so I chose the name because it was her name, really. And somewhere along the line, I became Elly. I'm not quite sure how, but yes.
Elly instead of Ellen.
Elly instead of Ellen. And I think my British editor said, it just looked a bit tidier. Oh. So there you are.
Now we have it's the first time that I get to look at it, the locked room in Swedish, the låsta rummet. That's book 14, right?
Yes,
about Ruth Galloway.
Well, it was a really special book for me to write, and quite difficult book to me to write, because the Nighthawks, book 13, ends in December 2019. So before the pandemic, exactly. So I knew that in the next book I would either have to ignore the pandemic, which I know a lot of writers do, and why not, really, because maybe people don't want to read about it, or I would have to cover the pandemic. So I thought I would cover it. So the book starts in February 2020, when Nelson is busy saying, oh, it's just a cold, what nonsense, and the druid character is putting a circle of protection around his house, so he knows what's coming. And then, of course, in March 2020, lockdown came. All writers loved locked room mysteries, and suddenly the whole country was one big locked room mystery. So in some ways it was quite difficult to write, trying to relive those times, and we were all very scared, and sort of terrible death toll and things. But in another way it was a great opportunity for a writer, I have to say, a great challenge.
But you connected it also to a historic event of lockdown, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Well, if all my books have a sort of modern day crime and a historical crime, because of Ruth being an archaeologist. And of course the obvious parallel is the plague. And Norwich in Norfolk had 2 big outbreaks of the plague in the 1300s and the 1600s. And when the plague came, their version of lockdown was literally to seal people in their houses if they thought they had the plague, to lock them in. And there's also echoes of this, because there were some quite interesting parallels, because in England we had this thing about, and I think the same here, about social distancing, about keeping a certain distance. And in the medieval plague, they had like a long stick that they used to measure how far apart you'd be. And they had people called watchers who would check that you were locked into your house. So there were many interesting parallels, actually.
Actually, I've seen an old lady in Stockholm once with that kind of stick
Oh, really?
right now during
Yes.
COVID.
Well, I think people who used a stick to walk, it was quite useful, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
And we were told to keep 2 meters apart, and nobody really had any idea how much that was. And the TV presenter, who also is an author, Richard Osman, said it's the length of him. So we're just trying to imagine a whole Richard Osman lying down, and that's the distance you should keep away.
That's the Thursday Murder Club.
The Thursday Murder
Right,
Club,
right.
yes.
It's been a huge success in
Yeah,
Sweden
and
too.
in England too, it's great.
Yeah. I've heard that you also have plans for another series, because this is the book 15 coming, the part 15 about Ruth Galloway will be released in English soon, and then you would do something else, I've heard. But my question is, how does one as a writer know what to do next?
It's a really good question, and I'm not sure I know the answer, but I have said that the book after this one, so after The Locked Room, which in English is called The Last Remains,
Yeah.
will be the last Ruth book for now. I haven't said forever, but I feel that this part of her story has been told. So, but I have ideas. It's not really the problem with ideas. I was talking to a fantastic Swedish writer last night, Katarina Sundvall, and she said she has at least 3 books in her head. And I think a lot of writers are like that. You have them sort of whirling around in your head, and it's which one comes to the fore, really. But I do have an idea for a new series. It's not quite ready to talk about yet because it's still working out in my head, but I do have an idea which I think people will like, so I'd like to try and do that. But I might well come back to Ruth, I don't know.
That's exciting. And another part of being a writer is this part, traveling and meeting readers. And I saw you yesterday signing books, and it was a really long queue with people wanting to talk to you. Is that something you enjoy doing?
I really like that. I really love that, actually. I love meeting readers. I mean, what could be better than to meet people who say that they enjoy your books, or sometimes even that your books have been really important to them, sort of in lockdown or getting through difficult times, because we know how books can do that. So for me, it is a really part of the job that I love. It's almost like a reward. It's a reward for all the time in the writing shed on your own, because I don't much like being on my own. So this is almost a reward for it. And also I love going to new places and meeting new people, and I just love that side of it, I have to say.
Oh. Well, Dominica de Rosa, Elly Griffiths, thank you very much for this talk.
Thank
and
you
we're so
very
much
much.
looking forward to The Locked Room and then the last part of the series about Ruth Galloway. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much.